So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the second tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Hamashiach laid waste for many centuries. Reading from Yeshayahu the prophet, there is a portion of the specific layer related with tabernacling, related with trade, and related with the military, but mostly reading the futures section of trade. No person can deny the kingdom of the East, led by the kingdom of China, must lead the time of the restoration period regarding trade until the time of the autumn feast. Now we wish many situations regarding this period. However, not very many people can understand the couple thousand years is gone, and the time given for the period of the Mashiach, or the sent one, and the completion of the spring feast, and then afterwards the 1,000 years of deceit. Truly no person can deny the importance of understanding the prophecies. Many people, they can't understand Revelation because they simply don't understand the original manuscripts. Now, regarding Revelation, regarding Yeshayahu, the 24th chapter, and regarding the kingdom of the East, or the kingdom of China, why then during this period of time there is a section of the world with a failed economical system, and there is a section of the world simply leading the market? Is it mere fact of having cheap labor and producing more? If it is, it would not make any sense regarding the nations of the West, neither Europe, because both areas are very capable of producing. But what causes a nation to produce more and lead more? What kind of a spirit can drive such a powerful system? And why the nations previously were so prominent and are no longer prominent? Now, the only answers should be given are those found in the original manuscripts. Now then, Hebrew is a very important language, and very important prophecies. Because though so many nations they think some sort of a divine nature came and gave them total liberty of making choices, they don't realize there was only a period of time when the liberty of every choice was given. Now then, if a person restricts the understanding as a basis of individuals and families and cities and states, now dealing with the nations and the holy prophecies, the line of thinking isn't the same. There was a period of time when total liberty was given, and there is a short period of time of restoration and then the autumn feast, where then the liberties of the market are no longer given. Because of this fact, once again, what causes a nation of becoming so prominent, so strong, and so influential? Is that only the people coming around and making the decision of working harder in lifting a nation? Or is it related with a spiritual condition? Now then, when people don't spend time reading the Word, the tendency is reacting of each and every situation as far as bad as then evil and then not evil. And there is truly no distinction from many kinds of evils. Now then, the whole instruction and the information given through the prophets, there is a distinction. If a person studies, a person is going to find out that no nation in the world will escape the system of China. Now then, a few considerations regarding the scripture and the nomenclature used and the names used. And the answer is coming from Yirmiyah or Yirmiyahu. When the Babylonians were invading the land, Yirmiyah simply mentioned, don't fight against them because they must take over the land. And they found him to be a traitor. And those people who are angry at the Yirmiyahu, we don't find their names on the scripture, do we? Now then, the importance of understanding the scripture and the way the market will lead requires a bit more the study of the holy instructions. So then the resources of a nation can be properly used for a particular purpose. Now then, why is it the kingdom of the East is so prominent when we read from Revelation? Is it truly a reality for people to wish that their nations would prosper again? Now, prosperity have many kinds of understandings. When speaking of prosperity of a nation, speaking of the enlightenment of the scripture. However, most people when hear it, they thinking of money. Now then, Mitchiyahu, the 24th chapter, the Hamashiach was explaining, or the Mashiach is explaining, a few situations regarding the future. And then layering and lining up what it is in Revelation, and lining up the prophets. We find then that the Spirit that leads Revelation regarding then the Gentile nations is China. Now sometimes it's unimaginable that a country so far away from many nations would become the primary line of trade in the world. That's precisely what's coming, because the scriptures are not describing a nation, it's describing a spirit. Now then, if a person doesn't spend much time reading the scripture or reading the prophets, reading trade, it becomes one of those two things. Or it's evil or not evil. So why was then the prophet explaining the many kinds of spirit? Now then, in Revelation, then is explaining a few names or facets of evil. So evil is not evil by itself, as then the divine has many facets, many functions, so as evil. Now when speaking of the divine, it's not very profound only saying divine without understanding the many names or functions. So as evil. Now then, a very unlearned mind of Scripture can describe divine and not mention the facets or the functions and understanding each of them. What does it mean, the wine of perdition? What does it mean, a prostitute that sat upon a dragon? So the kingdom of the East, explained in Revelation, obviously the scripture does not mention names of nations, because that's not the purpose, but it gives us a few lines on how a person can identify and understand what the prophet was saying. Now then, there is a portion during the time of the autumn feast, and the very first moments of autumn feast, and the initiation of the autumn feast is in chapter number 8 of Revelation. And obviously Revelation is not in chronological order. But why is it that Revelation, the 8th chapter, is so important? Can these great writings become part of our lives? Are these scripture truly part of our daily reading, understanding? So then, chapter number 8 is the initiation of autumn feast. And then chapter number 20, saw then a sent one that descended from heaven, having the key of the pit and a great chain in his hand. And he seized the dragon, the old serpent, who is the deceiver and the Hashatan. Problem. The word serpent is not found in the original manuscripts. Not in the sense of this particular section of Revelation, because dragon does not exist. And he sees the dragon, the old serpent, who is the deceiver in the Hashatan. This scripture has a problem. And he said, who seduced the whole habitable world. And he bound him for 1,000 years. And he cast him into the pit, and closed and sealed upon him, that he might not deceive the nations until 1,000 years is completed. But after this, he shall be released for a short time. Now then, a short time. What kind of a time is this? And then he saw thrones, and those who sat on them, and judgment was given to them, and the souls that were beheaded on behalf of the testimony of the Hamashiach and for the word of Elohim. And these are they who had not bowed down to the beast, nor its image, neither had they received the mark upon their forehead and their hand, and they lived and reigned with the Mashiach those 1,000 years. Now then, there is the binding of the destroyer for a period of time. And quite interestingly, Revelation 20 does not mention of the destroyer. It's kind of unique. Even the person that translated the manuscript had not truly a very profound understanding of the scripture, because the reality is that the layer is spoken of when speaking of the time of the Hamashiach ben Yosef of 1,000 years. It has to have a destroyer in the midst of it. Now, what is then the dragon, the old serpent, the deceiver, and the Hashatan? This truly is the first. Now then, comes the understanding of those people who are then involved, and then those people who are not involved with the first and second deaths. Now then, this is the portion that's a bit confusing. Because there is not truly a coming back from the dead. As the scripture very precisely states, that is given for a person to live once and then die. Now then, the flesh goes back to the dust, and the breath of life returns to the divine who gave us. Now then, the first and the second. Now there are souls who should be concerned during this period of time, where then the coming of the first and the second what kind of spiritual understanding should we have when reading this? And they will to reign with him the 1,000 years. And when these 1,000 years is completed, then Ahashatan will to be released from his prison and will go forth to seduce the nations that are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, and to gather them for the combat, whose number is the sand of the sea. The scripture is very important because later on speaks, and then fire came down from Elohim out of heaven and consumed them, and that spirit, they pointed the finger at people, and the false prophet wilt be tormented a day and a night forever and ever. Now this olam, that's the word in Hebrew, must understand what it means. And also saw thrones and those who sat on it, and heaven fled away, and their place was not found. And he saw the dead great standing before the throne, and then the Megillas were open. Another Megillah was open. Now then, the dead, they were judged by what was recorded on the Megillas. After what they have done. Then they were judged. Now then, is given once for a person to live and judged. Past tense. What else can the Hamashiach reveal regarding this particular chapter of Revelation? Extremely important. What kind of coming back from the dead for the first and the second? Can these make sense whatsoever? What does it mean? And death and Sheol were cast into the lake of fire, and the second death, namely this lake of fire. If anyone was not found in Megillah of life, he was cast into this lake of fire. Chapter number 20 gives us very powerful clues of the interaction of these particular layers, and also relate a portion with what then Shaliach Shaul mentioned previously. Next time we're going to evaluate more of these situations, because then there is a portion of the camps of the set apart believers, and these must obviously become part of ourselves if we spend the time reading, understanding the scripture. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.